Ever since the beginning of the MCU, certain serious moments were broken up with a little bit of lighthearted comedy, and this worked well because it was done sparingly and it was never done during very important emotional events. Unfortunately, it didn't stay like that. Disney thought that if a little bit of that style was successful, then increasing it would be even more successful. Except that's not what happened. As we've seen with the more recent movies and shows, Disney has implemented what is effectively a quota system where a certain amount of comedy needs to be included, and this is often to the detriment of the story, the characters, and whatever emotional moment was happening. And we've seen that sort of thing throughout the entire series already, but now we arrive at this episode, which was clearly meant to just be a full-on comedy, except there's a problem: it's not funny. At all. It would be a stretch to suggest that this episode has any sort of meaningful plot. It's nothing more than a string of failed comedic attempts, one after another. From start to finish, everything in this episode is awful and cringe. Marvel's What If is bad. Episode 7. This one's probably going to be one of the shortest videos I make on this series, simply because there isn't much story to actually critique. Like I said, it's nothing but bad jokes and non-stop cringe the whole way through. It starts in a similar way to the first Thor movie with Jane Foster and that annoying girl taking readings from outer space. Although this time around, Erik Selvig is mysteriously absent. He does get mentioned later in the episode, but he has no screen time and no dialogue. So I don't know if this is Marvel trying to reduce the number of male characters for the MCU, or if they were just being lazy and cheap and decided to cut back on the amount of animation. Honestly, it's probably a bit of both.
Seems fairly obvious.
Regardless, these two are able to detect what appears to be an incoming alien invasion, and they try to call S.H.I.E.L.D. to notify them, but nobody wants to listen. Now, I'm not sure why S.H.I.E.L.D. would just outright dismiss this sort of thing. After all, it is their job. But I think a better question is, how would they possibly not be aware of it in the first place? How is it that these two morons in a van,
and I live in a van down by the river,
are able to detect the incoming alien energy, but S.H.I.E.L.D., with all of its money and resources, just somehow misses it?
Treatment of the story as anything remotely approaching realistic is insanity.
The aliens arrive in Las Vegas, and it's revealed to be Thor and a bunch of his idiot friends. But they're not here for invasion. Instead, they're here to party. The Watcher then gives us some exposition about the change to this universe. When Odin found Loki as a baby, instead of raising him as his own, he decided to give him back to the Frost Giants. In the main MCU timeline, Loki acted as a counterbalance and prevented Thor from getting too much out of hand. But in this universe, that never happened, and Thor's immaturity and his wildness goes unchecked.
Out, man.
We get a flashback of what happened immediately before the start of the episode. Odin goes into his Odin sleep, which allows Frigga to go on some sort of vacation, leaving Thor in charge, and he is expected to learn about what it means to be a king and how to properly rule the Asgardian people, but instead he makes plans to go off and party on Earth. And unfortunately, I have to point out the hilariously awful and very much forced diversity, as Frigga has 3 of her female friends with her, and of course Disney needs to implement their diversity quota, which means that while one of them is white, another one is black, and the third one is Asian. Because fucking of course. Now keep in mind that Asgard and all of these characters are from Norse mythology, meaning that every single person in Asgard is white. But of course, that sort of thing is not allowed in current year, so we get a bunch of bullshit in the form of racist blackwashing, which means we get another stamp on the card. I'm only gonna give one stamp because both of these are minor no-name characters and no one cares about them, but the point still remains that it is, you know, wrong.
I have spoken.
The thing that's very much hypocritical about this behavior is that it only ever happens to Norse and Anglo-Saxon mythos and never to any of the others. With Asgard, you have all of these ridiculously absurd diversity drop-ins. But if you look at what happened in similar situations with Shang-Chi and the Asian equivalent of Asgard, Ta Lo, There are no diversity drop-ins at all. Every single person there is Asian. For the Asgardians, Disney had no problem racistly blackwashing major characters like Valkyrie, but here in Ta Lo, there's none of that drop-in tokenism. There's not a single black person in the entire place. It's like a Democrat convention circa 1960.
Ooh, that one hurt.
Regardless, Thor convinces his friends that it'll be totally fine if they go to Earth and start partying, and we've seen that they use the Rainbow Bridge to get there, but this creates a pretty big plot hole because Heimdall, who has also, by the way, been racistly blackwashed, you know what, we're putting another stamp on the board for Heimdall. There you go. So Heimdall is not going to open the Rainbow Bridge for them, and yet somehow Thor and his friends use the Rainbow Bridge to get to Earth, and Heimdall just doesn't know about it? How? Later on, we do see other aliens using ships to get down to Earth, but it doesn't explain how Thor was able to use the Rainbow Bridge to get down to Earth. And also, it does appear that some of the other aliens from around the universe are also very clearly being teleported to Earth for the party through the use of the Rainbow Bridge. And why would not Heimdall be allowing this? It doesn't make any sense. It's never explained, and again, this is just something that the writers on this series have a habit of doing. Even though something doesn't make sense or shouldn't be possible, it just kind of happens so that the plot can move forward.
And your script ain't worth the buffalo shit on a nickel.
Jane Foster is concerned about Thor and his party because apparently the last one he had led to the destruction of an entire planet, although this is never fully explained, and it's just used as an extremely weak excuse for why everyone needs to get Thor to stop partying. However, when she goes to talk to him, she doesn't manage to convince him of anything, and they just end up partying for the rest of the night. The following morning, Maria Hill from S.H.I.E.L.D. shows up at the hotel room instead of Nick Fury, because apparently Samuel L. Jackson was too expensive to get for more episodes. She says that Jane Foster was the first one to notify S.H.I.E.L.D. about the alien event, which again, I need to point out is incredibly stupid considering the amount of money and resources available to S.H.I.E.L.D. and the fact that it's their job to protect the planet. Once more, there's another vague explanation about how Thor's party is somehow going to lead to the destruction of the planet. But don't worry, it gets worse. S.H.I.E.L.D. then decides to call in one of the worst characters possible, and they use the beeper to contact Captain Marvel.
No! God! No! No! No!
She arrives near Thor and demands that he stop the party and leave the planet, and it should be noted that up until this point, Thor and the other aliens haven't actually done any harm or been malicious in any way, and it seems that he and everyone involved is just having a good time. So Thor correctly says that the people are enjoying themselves and Captain Marvel should just, kind of buzz off. And she responds by punching him.
Is that like a personal attack or something?
And it gets worse because even after getting hit, Thor shows an incredible amount of restraint and doesn't go after Marvel. Instead, he just calls her a party pooper, which leads her into attacking him a second time.
Who the hell is this bitch?
Again, this is more of the double standards that the woke morons in Hollywood love to have. Imagine for a second if the roles were reversed and a male character had suddenly physically attacked a female character for no reason other than he was annoyed with her. The woke weirdos would be screeching at the sky, whining about the patriarchy.
These people are mentally ill.
Because just like with diversity drop-ins and the race swapping of characters, this sort of unprovoked violence is only allowed to happen in one direction. I realize that some of my viewers think I harp on this sort of thing a little too much, but the bottom line is this. The Disney writers and Hollywood in general are a bunch of hateful morons, and they need to be called out on it. And if not me, then who?
Is that a fact? That's a fact.
Getting back to what little there is of a story, Thor finally starts fighting back, and he manages to hit Marvel so hard that she flies into another country, and for some bizarre reason, the animators decided to put the names of the countries superimposed on the Earth as if it was a gigantic map. Yes, this is obviously an animated series with aliens and superpowers, but I can't understand why they would make this decision because not only does it look dumb, but it also destroys any semblance of immersion in the story. Again, what little there is of it. And it's not just the animators either, it's also the editors and the sound effect crew, because at one point during the fight, Thor ends up knocking over Stonehenge, which for some reason the show creators thought it would be a great idea to include the audio sound effect of bowling pins getting knocked over.
Don't you have to be stupid somewhere else?
I'm confused here. Is this supposed to be a story that's canon to the MCU, or is this just another episode of Tom and Jerry? The two keep fighting, knocking each other around the planet until they finally arrive right back where they started. Thor then puts his hammer on Marvel's chest, which locks her to the ground, just like what it did with Loki in the first movie. And I have to say, I'm honestly surprised that this works, because I really have a hard time believing that the Disney writers would consider Captain Marvel to be unworthy. Even though she very obviously is not worthy, but I'm surprised that they would think that.
I was not expecting that.
Back in the S.H.I.E.L.D. helicarrier, Maria Hill is annoyed that Marvel wasn't able to stop Thor, but Marvel says that she can't use her full power because it would cause too much damage to the planet. So they come up with a plan of bringing Thor into an isolated location where it won't hurt other people. And hold on a second here, because let's take a look at what just happened about a minute ago in the previous scene. And you can see, yeah, look at all these places that they were fighting. They look, yeah, that definitely looks like a largely isolated location where it wouldn't hurt anybody if Captain Marvel was using her full power. So why exactly was she not doing it then, and why did they need to bring him to a new place? Do you see how stupid all of this is?
I am tired of these people.
Of course, Jane doesn't like this plan, so she decides to do something else about it, and that is to try to contact Not Heimdall. So she uses some satellites to project her voice into the galaxy to call out for Idris Elba. And obviously the sound waves wouldn't get there, but he can hear his name being spoken throughout the galaxy, magic, blah, 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 you get the idea. Anyways, he uses the Rainbow Bridge to bring Jane to Asgard, where she talks to Frigga. Now, Marvel has brought Thor to a remote frozen area, and now S.H.I.E.L.D. plans to also use some nukes to take out Thor, just in case Captain Marvel isn't enough. But mere seconds before the attack happens, Frigga uses her magic to project herself and speak with Thor. Thor, of course, lies and says that he's on the planet for a cultural exchange and to learn about Midgard. Frigga doesn't really believe him and says that she's now going to travel to Earth herself to check up on Thor. He panics and convinces everyone to help clean up the planet. They manage to clean up everything, and when Frigga arrives, it plays out just like it does in 1,000 other party movies. She sees everything and it looks like it's all on the up and up and everything is going as it should be. But then there's one final joke when Thor calls his hammer and it has beads and underwear attached to it.
Please clap.
We then get some exposition from the Watcher talking about how Thor and Jane Foster will be together and they'll be happily ever after, but suddenly Ultron appears through a portal and he has possession of the Infinity Stones. This is going to set up the overall story arc for the next few episodes, and let me tell you, it's about to get incredibly stupid. Not only does it completely break canon, it's also entirely inconsistent with even the very rules that have been established within the MCU and this series. Ultimately, though, this episode ends up just being dumb and cringe filler and an utter waste of time. But make no mistake, it's gonna get a lot worse from here on. But thankfully, that's the end of episode 7.